Prologue. In the shadowed corners of the world, where ancient powers stir and the veil between the seen and unseen thins, destinies are woven on looms of sacrifice and longing. There are bloodlines touched by the moon, kings who wrestle with primal forces tethered to their very souls, their might a crown of both glory and unbearable solitude. And then there are those quieter souls, born with gifts that whisper rather than roar, sensitivities that can mend the fractures in a spirit as readily as they might bind a wound. Such gifts, often mistaken for fragility, can carry a strength potent enough to calm the most savage of hearts, to illuminate the deepest darkness. Consider a kingdom carved from ice and unyielding stone, ruled by a Lycan king whose name was a breath of fear on the wind, whose control was a legendary feat against the beast that clawed within him. For centuries his reign was one of isolated power, his heart a fortress as impenetrable as his mountain stronghold. And in a distant, sun-dappled village, where life moved to simpler rhythms, lived a young woman, her hands skilled in healing, her spirit touched by an empathy so profound it was both her burden and her most guarded secret. She dreamed not of thrones or power, but of autonomy, of a peace her gift often denied her. But fate, that relentless weaver, pays little heed to the humble dreams of mortals, or the stoic edicts of kings. When desperation forges an unholy bargain, when a life is traded to settle a blood debt, disparate worlds are set on a collision course. A gilded cage awaits, yes, but within its confines a power even older than Lycan law, more profound than any king's command, might just find its voice. For what is a beast, if not a heart in desperate need of understanding? And what is a healer if not the one destined to offer it? This is a tale of such a collision, where a debt condemned one, and a beast waited, unknowingly, to be claimed not by force, but by a touch.
The small goat's bleating was a raw, ragged sound that snagged at something deep inside Anya. She knelt in the damp straw of Old Man Hemlock's byre, the scent of worried livestock and wet earth clinging to the air. The kid, no bigger than a house cat, lay listless, its breathing shallow. Its mother nudged it with a frantic nose, her own distress a dull thrum Anya could feel in her own chest. "Easy now, Mama Goat," Anya murmured, her voice a low soothe. Her immediate goal was simple, to ease the kid's suffering, to try and coax life back into its fragile form. She reached out a hand, not yet touching, but extending that other part of herself, the part she kept carefully veiled. It was like unfurling something delicate, a whisper of warmth and understanding that sought out the kid's fading spark. The knot of pain and fear in the tiny creature was a sharp, cold point. Anya focused, breathing slowly, trying to gently unpick it, to offer a thread of her own vitality without drawing undue attention. It was a delicate balance, this gift of hers. Too much, and whispers would start, the kind that led to unwanted interest. Too little, and this kid wouldn't see another dawn. A quiet satisfaction bloomed as the kid's breathing hitched, then deepened slightly. Its unfocused eyes flickered. "There now," she whispered, finally laying a gentle hand on its flank. The relief was a soft wave, but beneath it, the familiar hum of anxiety about her family's troubles persisted, a shadow to her small joys. She longed for a simple future, one where this quiet work was enough, where the gnawing worry that etched lines around her father's eyes would finally ease. Her father, Elian, stood at the byre's entrance, his silhouette stark against the fading afternoon light. He wasn't watching her, not directly, but she felt his heavy gaze all the same. His shoulders were slumped, the weight of their dwindling savings and mounting debts a visible burden. He held a small, sealed parchment in his hand, his knuckles white. The sight of it sent a fresh spike of apprehension through Anya. That little scroll felt heavier than any stone. He cleared his throat, the sound rough. "Anya, when you're done there, a word." The brief warmth of the kid's rallying spirit chilled. The parchment in his hand seemed to pulse with a grim energy, a harbinger. Another demand? She wondered, her own breath catching. The quiet satisfaction from her healing touch was already fading, replaced by the familiar dread. The goat kid let out a stronger, albeit still weak, bleat. Anya stroked its head one last time, her gaze lingering on her father. The hook was set. That parchment promised to unravel the fragile piece she clung to. The scent of wood smoke and her mother's dwindling supply of calming herbs did little to soothe the tremor in Anya's hands as she sat at their small, scarred kitchen table. Her father, Elian, paced the worn floorboards, the ominous parchment from earlier now crumpled in his fist. Her mother, Lyra, watched him, her face a mask of strained composure, but Anya could feel the frantic beat of her fear like a trapped bird against her ribs. Anya's own heart hammered in sympathy, a desperate wish to find a solution, any solution, warring with a rising tide of powerlessness. "There's no other way, Anya," Elian finally choked out, his voice hoarse. He stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes filled with a despair that mirrored her own. "The debt is too great. Lord Hemlock, the merchants, they can only wait so long." He gestured vaguely towards the ledger on the mantelpiece, a thin book filled with too many red marks. "Traditional repayment. It's impossible now." Anya's breath caught. "Then what, Papa? What did the letter say?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. "It wasn't just a letter, child. It was a final notice. From the primary creditor." He swallowed hard. "The debt, the largest portion of it, it's not owed to anyone in this valley. It's owed to King Darius." The name dropped into the room like a block of ice. King Darius, the Lycan king. Anya's blood ran cold. Tales of him were sparse but terrifying. A ruler of a distant, formidable northern kingdom, a man of shadow and iron will, whose court was a place of lethal intrigue. And then there were the other whispers, the hushed, fearful stories of the beast that was said to dwell within him, a savage entity that even he, the king, struggled to contain. A shiver traced its way down her spine. A Lycan king. What could they possibly offer such a man? Her mother let out a small, stifled sob. "Elian, don't—" "She has to know, Lyra." Elian's voice cracked. "He doesn't want coin, Anya. Not anymore." The dread coiling in Anya's stomach tightened into a sickening knot. The sheer impossibility of their situation, being indebted to such a powerful, almost mythical figure, pressed down on her, stealing her breath. What could a Lycan king possibly want from a simple village family already teetering on the brink? Her earlier apprehension now felt like a naive child's fear. This was a chasm of true terror opening before her. Anya managed to whisper, "What then? What does he demand?" Her father looked away, towards the kitchen hearth where the dying embers cast dancing, distorted shadows on the wall. It was her mother who spoke, her voice barely audible. They were discussing an alternative, a different kind of payment, one that involves you, child. The words hung in the stifling air of the small cottage, each syllable a separate shard of ice piercing Anya's heart. Involves you. A cold dread, sharper than any she'd known, clawed its way up her throat. She stared at her father, her initial shock giving way to a desperate, horrified disbelief. "Me?" she finally managed, her voice a thin, reedy sound. "What could King Darius possibly want with me?" Her gaze flickered to her hands, the faint thrum of her gift a sudden, unwelcome awareness. Elian finally met her eyes, his own awash with a mixture of shame and utter despair. "He knows, Anya. Somehow he knows about your touch. He's demanded a healer." He ran a trembling hand through his already disheveled hair. "Not just any healer, one with a unique sensitivity. They say his own healers are insufficient for certain royal ailments." He couldn't quite bring himself to say curse or beast, but the implication hung heavy and suffocating. Betrayal, sharp and bitter, rose alongside the terror. "You would sell me?" The words felt like ash in her mouth. Her own father, her own family, condemning her to a fate in the court of a feared Lycan king. The simple future she dreamed of, a life of quiet purpose, her autonomy, all of it was crumbling before her eyes. Her deepest fear, that her gift would make her a prized possession, a tool to be exploited, was no longer a shadowy anxiety but a monstrous looming reality. This wasn't just a gilded cage, it was a sentence. "It's not a sale, Anya, it's the only way." Elian's voice broke, tears finally tracing paths down his weathered cheeks. "To save us. To save your mother. Your brothers. He would destroy us all otherwise." Her goal to escape, to reason with them, withered in the face of his raw anguish and the chilling finality of his words. She saw it then, the closed doors, the path already chosen for her. She was the price. Her internal flaw, the misbelief that her empathic gift was her greatest vulnerability, screamed its validation. She was being offered up precisely because of it. Anya felt a cold numbness spread through her limbs. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a hollow echo of what her life had been only moments before. A healer for the Lycan king. The title was a death knell for the Anya she knew. As if summoned by the crushing weight of her despair, a sharp, authoritative rap sounded at the door. Not the knock of a neighbor, but something official. Cold. Her father flinched, his face paling further. Through the small, grimy window, Anya saw them, two imposing figures on dark horses, their armor gleaming dully in the twilight, their faces stern and unyielding. The king's envoys. Her old life was over. The cage door was swinging shut. "Okay, I understand. We are moving on to Act 2, and I will continue to write from Anya's third-person limited POV, keeping each scene around 350 words and applying all the established frameworks and guidelines, especially focusing on the paranormal romance genre elements." The transfer was swift and brutal, devoid of any pretense of courtesy. One moment, Anya was clinging to her mother's trembling hand, the scent of familiar herbs and home a painful ache in her chest. The next, a guard with eyes like chips of granite and a grip of iron had her by the arm. Her father's choked farewell, her mother's silent tears. These were the last images seared into her mind as she was bundled into a waiting, windowless carriage. Each protest Anya tried to voice died in her throat, a useless flutter against the stony indifference of her captors. She was property now, a debt settled in flesh and fear. The journey was a blur of jolting discomfort and suffocating darkness. The air inside the carriage grew stale, thick with the scent of oiled leather and the subtle, musky aroma of the Lycan guards, an alien scent that prickled her senses. Shock warred with a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on her chest. Her freedom, her simple dreams, all snatched away. Deep fear, cold and coiling, was her constant companion. Her immediate goal became a primal instinct: observe, survive. She strained her ears for any snippet of conversation, any hint of weakness in the stoic guards outside. But there was nothing but the rhythmic thud of hooves and the creak of the wheels, carrying her further and further from everything she knew. What awaited her? A king of savage reputation, a court of shadows. A shiver ran down her spine. She had to find a way to endure, to perhaps find some flicker of hope, however small, in the oppressive darkness. Hours bled into a timeless stretch of misery. When the carriage finally lurched to a halt, the sudden stillness was almost as jarring as the preceding motion. The door was wrenched open, and harsh light momentarily blinded her. One of the guards, his face impassive, gestured curtly for her to exit. Anya stumbled out, her legs stiff, her heart pounding. Before her, impossibly vast and forbidding, rose the fortress of the Lycan king. It wasn't just stone and mortar. It was a manifestation of power. Dark towers piercing a bruised sky, walls so high they seemed to swallow the light. The main gates, wrought from black iron and carved with snarling beasts, looked less like an entrance and more like the maw of some colossal sleeping predator. A wave of despair washed over her. Her old life was truly gone, swallowed by the shadow of this monstrous place. She was a captive, and this was her cage. The moment Anya stepped past the colossal gates, the air changed. It grew colder, heavier, imbued with an ancient, watchful power that seemed to press in on her from all sides. The opulent grandeur of the Lycan court was a stark, terrifying contrast to the humble simplicity of her village. Vast halls with vaulted ceilings soared into shadow, their stone walls adorned with tapestries depicting brutal hunts and ancient battles. Lycans, tall and imposing in dark, rich fabrics, moved with a predatory grace. Their eyes, often an unsettling shade of gold or amber, flickered over her with unnerving intensity. Anya could feel the weight of their stares, the subtle assessment, the dismissal. Fear, sharp and coiling, tightened its grip around her chest, but a spark of her innate resilience, the part of her that refused to be utterly broken, urged her to keep her chin up, to observe, to learn the contours of this new prison and the nature of its warden. She was escorted through a labyrinth of corridors, the silence broken only by the click of her worn shoes against polished stone and the soft thud of her guards' boots. Servants, mostly human from what she could tell, scurried past with downcast eyes, their fear a palpable miasma in the air. It was a chilling testament to the power King Darius wielded. Finally, she was ushered into a vast antechamber, its grandeur oppressive. She tried a small, desperate plea to one of her impassive escorts. "Please, I just want to understand what is expected of me." But her words were met with a cold, dismissive silence that felt more cutting than any rebuke. The realization that traditional escape or even simple reasoning would be futile here settled upon her like a shroud. Her internal flaw, the fear that her gift would be her undoing, twisted in her gut. What did this formidable king truly want from her? What price would her unique sensitivity ultimately extract? The great doors at the far end of the antechamber creaked open, the sound echoing like a pronouncement of doom. A herald announced, his voice devoid of warmth. "Anya of Silverwood, brought before Darius, king of the Northern Fang." Anya's breath hitched. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She was about to face the Lycan king, the beast of whispers and nightmares. His presence, she sensed even before he fully entered her sight, was a crushing weight, a vortex of controlled power, and something else. Something wild, untamed, and terrifyingly alluring. King Darius entered the antechamber not with a thunderous presence, but with a chilling, almost silent intensity that was far more unnerving. He was tall, broader than any man Anya had ever seen, his dark attire impeccably tailored, doing little to conceal the formidable power rippling beneath. His face was a study in harsh aristocratic lines, his expression cold, calculating. But it was his eyes that seized her attention, a startling, piercing gold, like a predator's, holding an ancient, knowing light. Anya felt herself shrink under that gaze, a tiny, insignificant creature caught in the stare of a hawk. Her immediate goal was to survive this audience, to understand the rules of this terrifying new game, and above all to keep the true depth of her empathic gift shielded from his discerning gaze. "So, this is the healer," Darius stated, his voice a low, resonant baritone that vibrated through the stone floor and settled deep in Anya's bones. It wasn't a question. He circled her slowly, his movements fluid and deliberate, like a great cat assessing its prey. Anya stood ramrod straight, her hands clasped before her to still their trembling. "Your family's debt is substantial. You will serve in my household. Your duties will be outlined. Escape is inadvisable." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. "Disobedience," he added, his golden eyes glinting, "will have severe consequences." Anya swallowed hard, a knot of fear tightening in her throat. She could only nod, her voice failing her. As he drew nearer, she felt it, a subtle shift in the air around him, an undercurrent of raw, primal energy that her empathy registered with a jolt. It was a restless, almost pained sensation, like a caged storm. The beast, she thought with a fresh wave of terror, but also a strange, unwelcome flicker of curiosity. His eyes, for the briefest moment, seemed to change, the gold deepening, a flicker of something wilder, more ancient, peering out. It was gone in an instant, his control immaculate, but the sensation lingered, unsettling her profoundly. He made no further acknowledgement of her presence, turning to issue a curt dismissal to her guards. Anya knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that she was now fully enmeshed in this dangerous world. The terms of her captivity, vague as they were, had been set. There was no escape, only endurance. She would have to learn to navigate this court, to understand this king and the darkness that clung to him, if she had any hope of surviving. A severe-looking Lycan woman with a stern face stepped forward. "This way, human." Anya was led from the king's presence, her mind reeling, towards what she could only assume would be her gilded cage. The heavy, ornate door of a chamber closed behind her with a resounding thud, sealing her fate. Days blurred into a disorienting pattern within the stone heart of Darius's fortress. Anya's chambers, though furnished with rich tapestries and heavy, dark wood furniture that spoke of immense wealth, felt like a beautifully adorned prison cell. Her immediate goal was to learn the rhythms of this place, to fade into the stonework if possible, all while a knot of fear and a desolate sense of isolation remained her constant companions. She cautiously explored the sections of the fortress permitted to her, a small walled garden where the sky felt distant and judgmental, and the echoing corridors leading to the grand library, its shelves laden with ancient, leather-bound tomes whose very scent was intimidating. Every Lycan she encountered moved with an inherent predatory confidence that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Their deference to King Darius was absolute, a mixture of fierce loyalty and palpable fear that rippled through the court like an invisible current. Anya observed the subtle glances, the whispered conversations that ceased abruptly when she drew near, the almost imperceptible tightening of jaws when the king's name was mentioned. It was a world of shadows and unspoken rules, where a wrong word or a misplaced glance could have dire consequences. She felt the constant, oppressive awareness of Darius's power, even when he was nowhere in sight. It was woven into the very fabric of the fortress, a silent testament to his dominion. She was determined to survive, to piece together the complex puzzle of this court, but the sheer weight of its inherent danger was exhausting. One afternoon, while she was attempting to find solace in the chilly air of the walled garden, a Lycan noblewoman approached. Lady Valeriana was statuesque, her silver-streaked dark hair swept into an elaborate coif, her crimson gown a slash of color against the gray stone. Her smile, however, didn't quite reach her assessing, pale eyes. "The little human healer, I presume?" Valeriana's voice was smooth as polished ice. "Lost in our dreary old stones," Anya murmured a polite, non-committal response, her internal alarms ringing. This was not a casual encounter. Feigned kindness dripped from the courtier's tone, but beneath it, Anya's empathy sensed a sharp, calculating curiosity, a desire to glean information, perhaps to gauge her usefulness or her potential as a pawn. This was her first real taste of the court's insidious politics, and it left a bitter taste on her tongue. She had to be more careful than ever. A summons arrived a few days later, delivered by the same stern-faced Lycan woman who had first escorted her to her chambers. Anya's heart leaped into her throat. The king. Her goal was simple: perform whatever task was required with quiet efficiency and avoid provoking the formidable ruler whose presence still haunted her waking moments. She was led to a vast, wood-paneled chamber that seemed to serve as Darius's private study. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and a massive fireplace, though unlit, dominated one end of the room. Darius himself sat behind an enormous desk, his attention fixed on a series of maps spread before him. He didn't look up immediately, letting the silence stretch, a subtle display of power that prickled Anya's skin. "The ledgers for the Western Territories," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "They require an impartial eye to verify the quartermaster's accounting." He gestured to a stack of heavy books on a nearby table. It was a mundane task, almost insultingly so, and yet Anya felt the weight of his scrutiny. As she began the tedious work, her senses hyper-aware of his presence, she witnessed it. A messenger entered, delivered a report in hushed, urgent tones, and then retreated. Whatever news he bore was clearly unwelcome. Darius's knuckles whitened where he gripped a letter opener. A low, almost inaudible growl vibrated from his chest, a sound that resonated with a primal menace. His golden eyes, when he briefly glanced up, seemed to flash with an inhuman light, the irises constricting like a cat's. The air in the room crackled with a sudden, suffocating tension, a raw, untamed energy that made Anya's breath catch. Her empathy registered a maelstrom of frustration, tightly leashed fury, and a profound, aching loneliness that seemed to emanate from the very core of the king, or perhaps from the beast within him. He regained his impeccable control in an instant, his features smoothing into their customary harsh mask, but Anya had seen. She had felt the turmoil. She was terrified, yes, but beneath the fear, an unexpected pang of something akin to sympathy stirred within her. This king, so powerful, so feared, was also a prisoner of the very thing that defined him. It was a startling, dangerous insight. The king's curse, the untamed beast. It was real, and it was a torment. The whispers about the king's curse, his untamed beast, became more than just abstract fears for Anya a week later. She was in the library, a place she'd found some small solace in, when the commotion erupted in the main courtyard below. Shouts, the clash of steel, and a guttural roar that was distinctly inhuman ripped through the air, sending a jolt of pure terror through her. Her immediate instinct, her goal, was to remain unseen, to melt into the shadows of the towering bookshelves. Peeking through a narrow window, she saw chaos. Guards were scrambling, their faces grim. King Darius stood at the center of it, a whirlwind of controlled fury, his movements too fast, too powerful for a mere human. He wasn't fighting, not directly, but directing his guard with cold, lethal precision as they subdued a small group of attackers. It was over almost as quickly as it began. The attackers, clad in unfamiliar garb, were either dead or subdued. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Anya saw Darius give a curt nod, and one of the captured assailants was dragged away, his desperate pleas abruptly silenced. A cold knot formed in Anya's stomach. This was the ruthless reality of the Lycan king's rule. Her empathic gift, however, picked up more than just the fear and pain of the vanquished. It sensed a web of deceit and treachery clinging to the event, a calculated strike rather than a random attack. The air thrummed with the silent satisfaction of some unseen orchestrator. Later that day, the fortress still buzzing with the incident, Anya was summoned again. This time, not to the king's study, but to the infirmary. One of Darius's personal guards, a young Lycan named Marcus who had shown her a sliver of politeness, lay gravely wounded. The king himself stood near the cot, his presence a dark, volatile storm in the small room. His earlier fury had cooled into a dangerous, simmering rage. The scent of his power and something else, a deep, animalistic grief, was almost overwhelming. "Heal him," Darius commanded, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet underscored with a tension that promised dire consequences should she fail. The external threat to his reign was no longer a distant rumor. It was here, drawing blood within his walls, and she, Anya, was now being drawn closer to the king's dangerous inner circle, her healing abilities no longer a secret to be guarded, but a resource to be commanded. The stakes, she realized with a chilling certainty, had just been raised.
The whispers in his own court were growing louder, more insistent, like the rustle of dry leaves before a storm. Darius felt the pressure mount with each passing day, each veiled threat, each subtle act of defiance from those who coveted his throne. The constant vigilance was a grinding stone against his will, and the beast within him, that eternal, savage counterpart to his crown, stirred restlessly. It fed on the treachery, on the instability, its power a rising tide that threatened to breach the walls of his control, walls he'd spent a lifetime fortifying. Today the tide was a maelstrom. The beast surged, a raw, incandescent fury that clawed at his insides, promising oblivion if he yielded, promising to tear down everything he had sacrificed to build. As was his ritual, his burden, Darius retreated to the soundproofed depths of his private chambers, a sanctum designed to contain the monster he became. His goal, as always, was singular, absolute control. He would not allow the beast to shame his lineage, to unravel the kingdom. He locked the heavy oak door, the tumblers clicking into place like the shackles he mentally fastened around the raging entity. Alone he fought. But this time the familiar solitude of his battle was broken. A soft scratching at the door, then a hesitant voice. Anya, the human. His jaw tightened. His first instinct was to unleash a snarl that would send her fleeing in terror, a warning to never again witness him in this degraded state. He was a storm of agony, his human form barely containing the volcanic pressure. What drove her inexplicable courage, or perhaps monumental foolishness to seek him out now, he couldn't fathom. She didn't flee when he remained silent, didn't recoil when the very air around him seemed to crackle with contained violence. Instead, as she somehow breached his solitude, a strange, intangible current flowed from her. Her empathy, he was beginning to recognize its unique signature. It wasn't an attack, not a demand, but a gentle wave washing over the raging inferno within him. For the first time in centuries, the beast lessened. Its claws, usually buried deep in his soul, seemed to retract, just a fraction. The shock of it was profound, a physical jolt. This fragile human, this payment, possessed a power over his curse that no Lycan, no shaman, no ancient ritual had ever achieved. It was deeply unsettling, a dangerous vulnerability exposed, yet the sliver of peace it offered was undeniably potent. When the worst of the storm receded, and he felt the iron grip of his own will reassert itself, the way he looked at her had irrevocably changed. She was no longer just a debt settled. She was an anomaly, a puzzle that could be a weapon, or perhaps something far more perilous to the solitary reign he had so fiercely protected. The fragile peace her presence had granted was, as Darius knew it must be, fleeting. The plots against him continued, unseen currents dragging his kingdom towards chaos. An attempt on his life during a supposedly secure council meeting left him with a poisoned dagger wound, the venom quick and vicious, specifically designed to agitate the beast. He'd managed to contain the immediate transformation, but the effort left him vulnerable. The poison, a fire in his veins. And she was there, Anya. Her touch surprisingly steady as she worked to cleanse the wound, her brow furrowed in concentration. His goal was to remain impassive, to show no weakness, yet the throbbing agony and the rising snarl of the beast made it nearly impossible. As her empathy focused on him, a different kind of energy suddenly arced between them, a violent, almost electrical discharge that had nothing to do with the poison or his Lycan nature. It erupted from her. He felt it like a physical blow, a shockwave resonating deep within his core, a call to something ancient within his blood. He saw the pain and confusion flash across her face, heard her sharp intake of breath. And the beast within him, already agitated, didn't just react with rage, it roared in primal recognition, a possessive, absolute certainty that shook him to his very foundations. Ancient lore, prophecies his ancestors had whispered of and he had dismissed as mere myth, surged into his mind with undeniable clarity. She was not merely human. Proximity to him, to the concentrated power of his lineage, was awakening a dormant shifter nature within her. The signs, now that he saw them, were undeniable. She was fated to his bloodline, his fated mate. His world tilted on its axis. The human healer, a pawn in his game of survival, was now a shifter. His mate. The implications were staggering, a cascade of political and personal Armageddons. His immediate goal was to understand the depth of this, to verify what his every instinct, what the very soul of his beast, now screamed as truth. He was stunned, caught in a maelstrom of surging primal possessiveness and the cold, calculating part of his mind that could only see the immense, terrifying complications this unleashed. This changed every strategy, every carefully laid plan. A human mate was a liability he had grudgingly accepted. A newly awakened, untrained shifter mate, fated or not, was a force of nature that could either be his ultimate salvation or his catastrophic ruin. She was a glaring vulnerability, a beacon for his enemies. Yet the thought of any other Lycan laying claim to her, the mere idea of her being harmed, ignited a cold, black fury in him that eclipsed even the beast's most savage rage. The scent of her, no longer purely human but now tinged with the wild, intoxicating musk of a new shifter, was a maddening allure. He knew, with chilling certainty, that the forgotten heir, his true, shadowy enemy, would not be blind to this seismic shift in power. Anya, his fated mate, had just become the most valuable and most endangered piece on the board. Her awakening was as chaotic and untamed as a winter storm. Darius watched Anya, a maelstrom of conflicting emotions warring within him. He saw her struggle with senses suddenly, violently acute, the way she'd flinch at sounds he barely registered, the way her eyes, still their soft human brown but now holding a new wilder light, would widen at sense on the wind. Bursts of uncontrolled power would ripple from her at odd moments, a faint shimmer in the air, a thrum against his own heightened senses. It was endearing, in a way that tightened his chest and made the beast purr with a possessive satisfaction that was dangerously close to tenderness. His every instinct, honed by centuries of solitary rule and constant threat, screamed to shield her, to lock her away in the deepest, most secure part of his fortress until she could master this new, volatile part of herself. But the court, his damnable, treacherous court, had too many eyes, too many sharpened ears, all attuned to the slightest tremor in the currents of power. And then, his deepest fears were realized. An attack. Not the usual subtle poisoning of alliances or whispers of dissent, but a direct, brutal assault within the supposedly sacrosanct halls of his private wing. It was aimed with vicious precision, not just at his throne, but at her, at Anya. The cold, calculating King Darius, the ruler who meted out justice with icy precision, vanished. The beast within him didn't just stir. It erupted, a torrent of protective fury so absolute it was almost a relief to unleash it. But this was not the mindless rage of its near escapes. This was a focused, sentient inferno, its sole purpose to form an unbreakable shield around Anya. His singular goal became to annihilate any threat to her. There was a savage satisfaction in the crunch of bone under his claws, in the terrified understanding in his enemy's eyes before he tore them apart. He moved, a blur of black fur and razor-sharp intent, placing his body between her and the assassin's blades, his snarls a promise of agonizing death. Her safety was now paramount, tied inextricably to his own survival, to the very future of his lineage and the security of his throne. And as the last attacker fell, as he stood panting over the carnage, the scent of blood thick in the air, he saw her. She was terrified, yes, but standing. And in her hand, a faint shimmer of light, a nascent shield she had instinctively thrown up. It was weak, flickering, but it was hers. A fierce, unexpected pride surged through him, a counterpoint to the undiminished burning need to protect. That spark of her own power, it was magnificent, but it also painted an even larger, more irresistible target on her back. His enemies would not be idle. He had to prepare her. He had to prepare his kingdom for the storm she and their fated bond would inevitably unleash. Anya was a paradox. Fragile in her human form, yet possessing a spirit that bent but never broke. And now, this nascent shifter power that thrummed beneath her skin, wild and untamed. Darius took it upon himself to guide her, to drag forth that dormant Lycan heritage and mold it. His goal was twofold. She needed to be able to defend herself, for his enemies were relentless, and he needed to understand the full extent of what she was, what she meant to him. Their training sessions were held in the most secluded courtyards of the fortress, under the oppressive gaze of ancient stones. He pushed her, relentlessly. The Lycan world was unforgiving. Survival was a weapon honed through pain and perseverance. He would see her strong, or see her fail in the relative safety of his presence. Yet, in these moments of forced proximity, of shared struggle and the metallic tang of her exertions mingling with the earthy scent of the training grounds, the carefully constructed barriers around his own heart began to crumble. Her scent, now a potent, intoxicating blend of human softness, and the wild, sharp tang of an awakening shifter, was a constant distraction, a fire in his blood. Her courage, the way her eyes, still that soft brown but now flecked with gold, would flash with determination even when exhaustion threatened to claim her. It was a resilience he found himself admiring more than he cared to admit. The passion that ignited between them in stolen glances, in the brush of his hand against hers as he corrected her stance, was a wildfire, consuming and absolute. It was a dangerous, exhilarating burn. In rare moments when the brutal training ceased and a fragile quiet settled between them, he found himself speaking of things he had never voiced to another soul. The crushing weight of his crown, the centuries of solitude, the eternal battle with the beast. His loneliness, an ancient companion, seemed to ease infinitesimally in her presence. He told himself it was strategy, a way to bind her loyalty. But the contented purr of the beast within him when she was near, when her unique empathic gift seemed to unintentionally soothe its restless edges, belied that cold logic. His goal expanded beyond merely ensuring her survival. He needed her to understand that she was not some temporary possession but his queen, his equal. He felt a fierce, possessive love for her that defied reason, a desperate, primal need to keep her safe, to make her irrevocably his. We were no longer king and captive, he realized with a jolt that was both terrifying and thrilling. We were mates, allies, lovers. And his every strategy, every thought, now revolved around her safety, her power, and her eventual integration into his world as its true queen. Our combined efforts, her strange empathic insights, and my own intelligence network, were leading us closer to the shadowy orchestrator of chaos, the forgotten heir who sought his throne. The truth, when his intelligence network finally dragged it from the shadows, was a serpent's strike, venomous and vile. Darius stared at the report, the parchment crinkling in his tightening fist. The forgotten heir, the architect of the assassination attempts, the insidious poison that had sought to unravel his reign for months, was Anya's own sibling. A ghost from her past, one she'd believed lost, now resurrected as a monster consumed by a ruthless ambition that mirrored, in a twisted way, the very drive that had secured Darius his own crown. He felt the information lodged like a shard of ice in his gut. His primary goal, in that instant, became to shield Anya from the immediate, brutal impact of this revelation, even as his mind raced, calculating the new, deeply personal dimensions of this war. He found her in the library, a rare moment of peace for her amidst the turmoil of her awakening. The way the filtered light caught the new, subtle golden flecks in her eyes sent a possessive thrum through him. Telling her would be like shattering something precious. When he laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece, he watched the devastation ripple across her features. Her initial disbelief, then the dawning horror, the profound grief that made her tremble. Each stage was a fresh torment to witness. A cold, murderous rage, an emotion he knew intimately but rarely allowed such free rein, settled deep within his heart. This was not merely an attack on his throne. It was a deliberate, cruel strike against his mate, by her own blood. How? She whispered, her voice a fragile thing. Why? He had no answers for that, only the grim certainty of the betrayal. His fury was absolute, a chilling counterpoint to the agony he saw in her. His objective was clear: obliterate this threat. But first, he had to guide Anya through this emotional maelstrom. The conflict was no longer solely political. It had become intensely, irrevocably personal. This was a betrayal of the deepest kind, aimed at the very heart of what he now held most dear, her. His resolve to protect Anya, to destroy this enemy who shared her bloodline, became immutable. He would not allow her to face this alone. As if on cue, a messenger arrived, his face pale, bearing a scroll sealed with an unfamiliar crest, but one that now screamed of treachery. It was a taunt, a direct threat against Anya, an arrogant challenge from her sibling. They had underestimated his wrath. They had underestimated his determination to protect what was irrevocably, absolutely his. The game had changed, and the stakes were now Anya's life, her very soul. The attack on the stronghold was audacious, a desperate, venomous gamble by a cornered serpent, but one backed by a cunning that Darius had to grudgingly acknowledge, even as fury consumed him. Alarms blared through the fortress, the discordant clang of steel on steel echoing from the lower levels. His sibling-in-law, it seemed, was making their play. His immediate goal was singular: find Anya, ensure her safety, then unleash hell. He found her not cowering, as some might, but in the central training courtyard, her makeshift staff gripped tight, her eyes wide but blazing with a protective fire that mirrored his own. She was no longer the terrified human who had first entered his court. She was a nascent shifter queen, her power still raw, untamed, but undeniably present. The sight of her, ready to stand against the storm, sent a fresh wave of possessive pride, of fierce, consuming love surging through him. They had not accounted for Anya. "Stay by me," he commanded, his voice a low growl that brooked no argument. She simply nodded, her gaze locked with his, a silent vow passing between them. And then they fought. Assassins, cloaked and bearing the sigil of the forgotten heir, poured into the courtyard. Darius met them with the full, unleashed fury of the Lycan king, the beast within him not a raging torment, but a focused weapon, its power thrumming in harmony with his will, amplified by the presence of its mate. He tore through their ranks, a whirlwind of claw and fang, but his senses were equally attuned to Anya. He saw her move with a newfound instinctual grace, her empathy a strange invisible shield that seemed to anticipate her opponent's moves, her staff a blur as she deflected and struck. Her courage, her ferocity, it fueled his own. They moved as one, an unspoken battlefield rhythm connecting them, their powers, their instincts intertwined. The beast roared its approval, a savage joy in fighting alongside her. Their singular goal was to survive, to protect each other, to crush this insidious rebellion. He felt an exhilarating fusion of power and purpose, the loneliness of his kingship, momentarily forgotten in the heat of their shared battle. His love and possessiveness for her were a tangible force, sharpening his senses, strengthening his resolve. This bloody confrontation solidified their union, forged it anew in blood and fire. Anya was no longer a weakness to be shielded, but a formidable ally, his true queen. There was no question of turning back. Their fates, their very souls, were now one. They repelled the attackers, the courtyard littered with the fallen. But her sibling, the architect of this pain, this treachery, was not among them. They had slithered away, but not before their agents delivered a parting shot. A whispered piece of information to a dying captive, a secret revealed that was clearly designed to cripple him, to sow doubt and discord. He saw the fear flicker in Anya's eyes as the words reached them, but looking at her then, resolute and fierce by his side, bloodied but unbowed, he knew. Whatever came next, whatever poison her kin had unleashed, they would face it together. The true war had just begun.
The information Darius's dying enemy had gasped out, a hidden vulnerability, a chink in the Lycan King's formidable armor, became a poisoned dart in the hands of Anya's sibling. They struck with insidious precision. It wasn't a direct assault this time, but something far more cunning. A subtle toxin, perhaps, introduced into Darius's food or wine, or a dark piece of magic woven into an innocent-looking gift. Whatever its nature, the effect was devastating. Darius, who had seemed an indomitable force of nature, was weakened. His immense strength began to wane, his golden eyes clouded with a feverish light, and the beast within him, usually a contained inferno, now felt like a fractured, raging storm, its control precarious and terrifying. Anya's primary goal, her entire world, narrowed to saving him. She worked frantically in his chambers, the scent of rare herbs and her own fear thick in the air. She poured her empathic gift, her nascent shifter energy, into him, trying to locate the source of the affliction, to soothe the rampaging beast that thrashed against his will. But her attempts felt like cupped hands trying to bail out a sinking ship. The poison or curse was too insidious, too deeply woven. Her confidence, so newly found, began to crumble. Desperation gnawed at her. She was a healer. This was her purpose. Yet she was failing him. Failing them. Darius, even in his weakened state, fought with a terrifying ferocity to maintain control. His growls were deeper, laced with pain, and his powerful body would spasm, claws unsheathing involuntarily. He would look at her, his eyes a battleground of torment and a desperate plea for her safety, for her to stay away, even as another part of him, the beast, seemed to crave her presence as an anchor. The antagonist, her own sibling, had found a way to strike at the very core of his being, and doubt, cold and creeping, began to coil around Anya's heart. What if she wasn't enough? What if her gifts, her newfound nature, were ultimately useless against such calculated cruelty? Her sibling's victory was not just in Darius's physical decline, but in the insidious way they managed to mock Anya's every desperate effort. A small, exquisitely carved bird arrived at her chamber window, bearing a tiny, blood-red ribbon. There was no note, but the message was clear, a chilling taunt. See how easily he breaks? See how little your love, your healing, truly matters? The cruelty was a physical blow, stealing her breath and leaving her to stare at the innocent-seeming token, a symbol of her growing despair. The insidious campaign orchestrated by Anya's sibling didn't stop with Darius's physical weakening. It spread like a contagion through the court. Whispers, carefully planted and nurtured, began to circulate. The human mate, a forbidden union, her sudden shifter nature, a dark omen, a sign of instability. Anya felt the shift in the atmosphere, the way Lycan courtiers who had once offered grudging respect now averted their gazes, their faces shuddered. The few tentative alliances she had begun to form with members of Darius's loyal guard grew strained, their interactions laced with a new, uncomfortable caution. Her goal of simply surviving morphed into a desperate attempt to hold onto any shred of credibility, any wisp of trust, but it felt like grasping at smoke. Darius, hampered by the poison still warring within him and the increasing volatility of his beast, struggled to maintain order. His pronouncements lacked their usual iron authority. His absences from courtly duties grew more frequent. And in that power vacuum, Anya's sibling masterfully leveraged their advantage. They presented themselves not as a usurper, but as a concerned party, a voice of reason amidst the growing chaos, subtly fanning the flames of doubt against Darius and, more pointedly, against Anya. She became the scapegoat, the human who had bewitched their king, whose unnatural transformation was a blight upon his reign. Anya felt responsible, a crushing weight of guilt settling upon her. Her internal flaw, the deep-seated fear that her gift, her very nature, would bring harm and discord, was brutally triggered and magnified 100-fold. She saw the doubt in the eyes of the Lycans, heard the fear in their hushed tones when she passed. Was she the cause of all this? Had her presence, her fated bond with Darius, truly brought a curse upon them? Her self-worth plummeted. She tried to project strength to assist Darius in quelling the unrest, but her efforts felt clumsy, her human origins a glaring mark against her in this world of ancient power and rigid tradition. The lowest blow came in the form of a clandestine meeting, an appeal from her sibling delivered through a terrified, unwilling servant. It was a twisted message, invoking a shared past Anya barely remembered, painting Darius as the true monster, the source of all their suffering, and offering her a place within a new, healed family, a new order. The manipulation was blatant, yet it struck at her most vulnerable point. Her fractured sense of belonging, her desperate longing for a family that wasn't a source of betrayal and pain. The isolation was complete, the support she and Darius had counted on wavering, and her sibling, it seemed, was effortlessly winning hearts and minds through masterful deceit. The all-is-lost moment crashed down upon Anya with the force of a collapsing mountain. Darius, already weakened and battling the poison coursing through his veins, was ambushed. Not by an army, but by a select few of his own council members, their faces grim with a twisted sense of duty, traitors swayed by her sibling's insidious rhetoric. Anya witnessed it from the gallery overlooking the throne room, a scream trapped in her throat, her limbs frozen in horrified disbelief. Her goal, her desperate, all-consuming need to protect him, was shattered by her powerlessness. He fought like the caged god he was, the beast erupting in a torrent of uncontrolled, agonized fury, but he was outnumbered, already compromised. She saw him fall, not dead, but subdued, ensnared by silver chains that sizzled against his skin, his roars of defiance choked into agonized whimpers. Her sibling appeared then, stepping from the shadows with an air of triumphant serenity that made Anya's blood run cold. They surveyed the scene, Darius, a fallen king, his proud Lycans either complicit or cowed into submission. And then, those cold, familiar eyes, so like her own, yet so utterly devoid of warmth, turned to Anya. Such a tragedy, little sister. Their voice echoed in the vast, suddenly silent throne room. All this chaos, all this pain, all because of a flawed king and his unsuitable attachment. Anya felt a failure so profound it threatened to extinguish the last embers of her spirit. She had tried to heal, to help, to love, and all she had brought was ruin. The weight of her past, her family selling her, her own blood betraying her, and the impossible, devastating present crushed her. Her misbelief that she was a magnet for disaster, inherently flawed and destined to cause pain, became a suffocating certainty. Her sibling offered the terrible choice, their voice deceptively gentle. Join me, Anya. Help me rebuild. Your king is broken, but perhaps with your unique talents, he can be salvaged. A puppet, of course, but alive. Or you can watch him fade, watch his beast consume him entirely in a cage fit for the monster he truly is. Despair, utter and absolute, washed over Anya. She looked at Darius, chained and bleeding, the sound of his pained breathing a death knell to her hope. She looked at her sibling, the architect of all this suffering, offering a poisoned chalice. There was no right choice, only varying degrees of agony. The silence in the throne room was broken only by a distant, anguished howl, the sound of Darius's beast, trapped and tormented, mirroring the desolation in her own soul. All, truly, seemed lost. The silence of the throne room, heavy with Darius's pained breathing and the chilling echo of her sibling's ultimatum, became a crucible for Anya. Despair had hollowed her out, leaving a brittle shell. Join them or watch him be destroyed. Her sibling's words were a cruel poison, designed to exploit the very empathy that was her core. She looked at Darius, chained and magnificent even in his suffering, the silver links burning against his lichen skin. The thought of him broken, a puppet king, was an agony. The thought of his destruction, a void she couldn't contemplate. Her misbelief that she was a magnet for disaster, a bringer of ruin, clawed at her. But then, through the suffocating fog of despair, a tiny defiant spark ignited. Her sibling's manipulation. It was based on her fear, on twisting her compassion into a weapon against herself. And Darius, his love for her, the fierce, unwavering protectiveness she'd seen in his golden eyes, even when his beast raged, that was real. That was a strength, not a weakness to be exploited. She remembered the feel of his hand in hers during their training, the shared vulnerability in quiet moments, the raw, possessive tenderness when his beast had cornered her not with violence but with a desperate, soulful longing. These memories were a lifeline. Anya's gaze drifted to the ancient tapestries lining the throne room, depicting Lycan legends. One, in particular, had always drawn her eye. A tale of a fabled moon called Luna, whose unique bond with her alpha king could soothe any malady, amplify any strength, and expose any deceit. It was just a story, of course. Yet, and then Marcus, the young guard she had healed, the one who had shown her small kindnesses, materialized from a hidden alcove, his face grim but resolute. He pressed a small, worn leather-bound journal into her hand. "My grandmother was a keeper of old lore, my lady," he whispered, his eyes darting towards the exits. She spoke of bonds that can sever even the darkest enchantments, of a sibling's power turned inward if the heart is true. Anya's fingers tightened around the journal. A crucial insight. A weakness. Her sibling's power was based on perverting love, on twisting bonds. But what if her own bond with Darius, fated and fierce, was the key? What if her empathy wasn't a vulnerability, but the very weapon they needed? A steely resolve began to solidify within her, displacing the despair. Her goal sharpened, no longer just to save Darius, but to reclaim her own agency, to protect the fragile hope of their future, and to stop her siblings' reign of terror. She would not be a pawn. She would be a queen. Her internal flaw, the fear of her own unique nature, began to recede. It was her strength. She looked at the distant, chained form of Darius, and a new, fierce love blazed within her. "Not like this," she whispered to the oppressive silence. Her first defiant action was a silent promise. Then she sent a coded message through Marcus, a desperate call to the few Lycans she knew remained loyal to their true king. The climb back from despair had begun. Hope, once a fragile ember, now burned with a steady, determined light within Anya. Following Marcus's hushed directions, she navigated the labyrinthine servant passages of the fortress, the small, worn journal clutched tight in her hand. Reaching Darius was a risk that made her heart pound, but the thought of leaving him to her siblings' mercy was unbearable. He was being held in the old dungeons, a place reeking of damp stone and forgotten despair, the silver chains still binding him, though he was conscious, his golden eyes blazing with a defiant, albeit weakened, fire when she finally slipped past the distracted, overconfident guards her sibling had posted. "Anya!" His voice was a rough rasp, laced with pain and a fierce, protective urgency. "You should not be here. It's too dangerous." "And leaving you here is acceptable?" she countered, her voice surprisingly firm. Her goal was clear: free him, heal him, and then, together, fight. She knelt beside him, her empathy reaching out, assessing the lingering effects of the poison, the raw burn of the silver, the agonizing strain on his beast. His newfound strength, when he saw the resolve in her eyes, the lack of fear was palpable. "I know things," she said softly, opening the journal. "Lore about our kind of bond, about how a true mate's empathy, our connection, can counteract twisted power, especially power rooted in broken kinship. Together in the dim, oppressive light of the dungeon, they devised a plan. It was risky, audacious, relying on her unique abilities and Darius's knowledge of his court and his siblings' likely tactics. They would not meet her sibling on their terms in a battle of brute force where Darius was still disadvantaged. Instead, they would use her siblings' arrogance, their overconfidence, against them. Anya would feign compliance, a broken woman ready to bargain, luring her sibling to a place of her choosing. Perhaps the ancient sunstone chamber, a place of Lycan ritual, where the old magic was said to be strong, and where the truth had a way of revealing itself. There, Anya would use her empathic connection not just to soothe Darius's beast, but to project the truth of her siblings' deceit, their malice, for any wavering Lycans to feel, to know. Darius, feigning greater weakness than he possessed, would be the bait, then the hammer. They rallied their few remaining trusted allies through Marcus. Those loyal to Darius not just for his power, but for the king he truly was. Each shared glance, each whispered pledge, solidified their bond, their shared purpose. They were focused, driven, their connection now an unbreakable weapon. They were ready to risk everything. The sibling, smug in their apparent victory, was preparing for their final move to seize total control, utterly unaware that the true king and his unexpected queen were setting a trap of their own. The air in the sunstone chamber was thick with ancient power, the massive amber-hued crystal at its center pulsing with a faint internal light. Anya had chosen this place carefully. It was a sacred heart within the fortress, a place where Lycan oaths were sworn and judgments rendered, where deceit was said to wither under the stone's unwavering gaze. Her sibling, lured by Anya's feigned message of surrender and a desperate plea to discuss terms for Darius's life, arrived with an escort of their most trusted, hardened loyalists, their arrogance a tangible force in the chamber. Anya's immediate goal was to maintain her facade of a broken, desperate woman, to draw them into the heart of her plan. Darius, concealed in an alcove with Marcus and their few remaining warriors, was a coiled serpent, his weakened state a carefully constructed illusion. Anya stood before the sunstone, her hands clasped, her head bowed. She allowed her fear to show, the very real terror that still churned within her, but now it was a tool, not a master. "You wanted to speak," she said, her voice trembling convincingly as her sibling approached, their lips curved in a triumphant smirk. "About Darius. About my place in your new order." The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every beat of her heart. She could feel her siblings' smug satisfaction, their dismissal of her as a spent force. She focused, drawing on every ounce of her empathic gift, every lesson Darius had taught her about her nascent shifter abilities. This was it, the initial stage of their desperate plan. Her nerves thrummed with a mixture of terror and a fierce, almost exhilarating resolve. Every word, every gesture had to be perfect. "You are wise to be reasonable, little sister," her sibling purred, stepping closer, their eyes glinting with cold amusement. "Darius is finished. His beast will consume him. But you have value." As they spoke, Anya began to weave her power, not as a shield, but as a subtle, pervasive current. She focused on the sunstone, on the ancient energies of the chamber, and then outward towards the Lycans present. Not just her siblings' guard, but also the hidden loyalists of Darius. She didn't project accusations, but truth. The raw pain of Darius's torment, the chilling ambition of her sibling, the unvarnished deceit that had fractured their kingdom. It was a delicate, dangerous dance, a silent battle of wills played out on an empathic plane. She felt the first flicker of confusion from one of her siblings' guards, a subtle wavering in their surety. The trap was being sprung. The point of direct confrontation was imminent. The air crackled. The sunstone seemed to brighten, and from the shadows, Darius let out a low, rumbling growl that was anything but weak. The sunstone chamber pulsed with a malevolent energy as Anya faced her sibling. The air was thick with the scent of ozone from clashing powers and the bitter tang of betrayal. Her sibling, wreathed in an aura of twisted, dark ambition, sneered. "Still playing the martyr, little sister? Still clinging to that broken king?" Anya's goal was singular, burning with a white-hot intensity. Win. Protect Darius. Protect their future. Every emotion she possessed, fury at her siblings' cruelty, a deep, aching sorrow for the kin she had lost to this madness, a fierce, unwavering love for Darius, and a grim determination born of survival, coalesced into a formidable resolve. She felt Darius at her back, a solid, reassuring presence, his power, though still recovering, a potent counterpoint to her own. His beast was no longer a caged storm, but a focused weapon, its energy intertwined with his, both thrumming with the strength of their fated bond. The battle was joined. It was a brutal, desperate dance of power and will. Her sibling wielded shadows and illusions, their attacks designed to cripple and confuse, to prey on doubt. But Anya, anchored by her love for Darius and the unwavering truth of her empathy, met them head-on. She unleashed her fully realized shifter abilities, a surge of protective energy that blazed like silver fire, a heightened instinct that allowed her to anticipate her siblings' treacherous moves. More than that, she used her empathy not as a passive shield, but as a piercing light, projecting the truth of her siblings' twisted motives, their lust for power, out into the chamber, aiming it at their few remaining loyalists whose own empathic senses, however dulled, could not entirely ignore the raw, undeniable waves of deceit. She saw doubt flicker in the eyes of her siblings' guards as they felt the cold, empty core of the ambition they served. Darius moved with a lethal grace, his Lycan form a blur of controlled fury, his attacks precise, empowered by the symbiotic strength of their bond. He was not just fighting for his throne, but for his mate, for their life together. Anya, in a desperate gamble, reached out with her empathy one last time towards her sibling, not to attack, but to find even a flicker of the person they once were. She found nothing but a hollow, aching void, consumed by a hunger that could never be filled. With a final, combined surge of power, Darius's raw, primal strength and Anya's cleansing, empathic fire, they shattered her siblings' dark defenses. They didn't kill them. Instead, their power was stripped away, their web of lies exposed to the harsh, unwavering light of the sunstone. Her sibling crumpled, no longer a fearsome heir, but a diminished, bitter figure, their reign of terror over. A moment of stunned silence descended, broken only by ragged breathing. The immediate threat was neutralized. Darius was beside her in an instant, his arm a steel band around her waist, their victory a raw, aching reality. The immediate aftermath of the battle was a chaotic symphony of relief and exhaustion. The Sunstone Chamber, moments before a crucible of dark power and desperate struggle, now felt strangely quiet, the ancient crystal pulsing with a calm, steady light. Anya leaned heavily against Darius, his strength a welcome anchor as the adrenaline began to recede, leaving her trembling. Her sibling, now stripped of their stolen power and charisma, was a sullen, defeated figure, quickly and efficiently taken into custody by Darius's most loyal guards, their dark mutterings lost in the grim efficiency of their removal. Imprisonment, perhaps banishment to the farthest, most desolate reaches of the kingdom, awaited them. A fate Darius would decide with his council, but one that would ensure they could never threaten their peace again. Anya's gaze swept over the chamber. A few of Darius's loyalists were wounded, as were some of her siblings' former guards who had, in the final moments, faltered under the weight of the truth she had projected. Her goal shifted immediately to healing, to mending what had been broken. With a gentle touch and a weary sigh, she moved among them, Lycan and human alike, her empathic gift now a soothing balm, easing pain, knitting torn flesh, her newfound shifter vitality lending an unexpected potency to her touch. Darius watched her, his golden eyes filled with an emotion so profound it made her heart ache with a mixture of joy and the lingering sorrow for the sibling she truly had lost. Once the wounded were tended to, he addressed the assembled court, his voice, though still bearing a trace of weariness, ringing with its customary authority, yet softened by a new warmth. He stood before them, not just as their king, but as a male who had fought for his mate. "Today," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the Lycans, his hand finding Anya's and lacing their fingers together. "The shadows that sought to divide us have been banished. The forgotten heir's treachery has been laid bare." His eyes then settled on Anya, a fierce pride in their depths. This is Anya, whose courage and unique gifts were instrumental in this victory. She came to us as a debt paid, but she stands before you now as my fated mate, my queen, the savior of our court and kingdom. A ripple of murmurs went through the assembled Lycans, but this time Anya sensed no fear or suspicion directed at her, only a dawning respect, and for some, awe. The political situation, so recently fraught with peril, began to stabilize under the weight of his words. their bond publicly, irrevocably affirmed. Their future, once a terrifying uncertainty, now felt like a path they would walk together, stronger for the trials they had endured. Weeks bled into months, and a fragile peace settled over the northern Fang territory, nurtured by the combined strength and compassion of its king and new queen. Anya, no longer a captive or a hidden secret, had fully embraced her role. The opulent court, once a place of terror, now felt like home, in a way she never could have anticipated. Her empathy, once a gift she feared, was now her greatest strength, allowing her to connect with the Lycan people, to understand their needs, their ancient traditions, and to help Darius rule with a wisdom and fairness that began to heal the fractures her siblings' treachery had caused. The Lycans, in turn, had come to respect, even love, their human-born queen, whose gentle heart belied a fierce spirit and an uncanny understanding of their kind. Darius, too, was transformed. The constant, isolating battle with his beast had found a new equilibrium. With Anya by his side, her mere presence a soothing balm to the ancient entity, the savage rage had tempered into a controlled, protective power. The curse, as he'd once seen it, now felt more like an accepted, integral part of him, a source of strength that was no longer a source of torment. He was still the formidable Lycan king, but the cold, calculating ruler had been softened by love, his capacity for intimacy, once feared, now a precious gift he shared only with her. They found their peace, their joy, in stolen moments of quiet, in the passionate depths of their connection, their days filled with the duties of rulers, their nights with the discovery of a love that had been forged in fire and betrayal. Anya felt a sense of belonging, of purpose, that she had never imagined possible. One evening, as a silver moon cast its glow over the snow-dusted peaks visible from their chamber balcony, Darius pulled her close, his arms a familiar, comforting weight around her. The scent of pine, of winter, and of him, Lycan and man, was the scent of her deepest contentment. Looking back, she murmured, her head resting against his strong chest, her hand covering his where it lay on her arm, the warmth of his beast's power a familiar thrum beneath her touch. I should have known. All those whispers of your beast, the fear in the court. She smiled softly. They were merely the cries of a soul aching for a touch mine was destined to give. He tilted her chin up, his golden eyes, now filled only with love and a possessive tenderness that still made her heart leap, met hers. And yours, Anya, he rumbled, his voice thick with emotion, was the only touch that could ever have reached it. He kissed her then, a promise of their shared future, a deeply satisfying fairy tale happily ever after for the woman once sold to the Lycan king, who had not only tamed his beast but had truly claimed his heart, becoming his equal, his queen, his everything.
Epilogue. And so we close the book on their tale, don't we? The story of Anya, the healer sold into darkness, and Darius, the Lycan king who found his dawn in her light. It's a story that settles in the heart, a warmth against the chill of our own cynical musings. We've walked with Anya through her fear, felt the weight of Darius's ancient burden, and perhaps in the quiet moments, we've seen reflections of our own battles with the beasts that reside within us all. Their legend, they say, is still whispered in the northern Fang territories and beyond. Ballads are sung of the human queen whose empathy was a shield and whose courage became a sword, the one who saw past the terrifying visage of the beast to the aching loneliness of the man. They speak of the Lycan king who learned that true strength isn't found in impenetrable control, but in the vulnerability of a shared heart. That intimacy is not a weakness, but the deepest wellspring of power. Did we not feel a thrill when her dormant power awakened? Did our hearts not ache with Darius's silent torment and soar when Anya's touch began to soothe it? Their journey reminds us, doesn't it, that sometimes the greatest strength lies in the softest of hands, that empathy can indeed be a force to reshape kingdoms. It makes us wonder about the hidden gifts within ourselves, the potential for connection even in the most unlikely of circumstances. The image of them, standing on that balcony, rulers of a healing land, their love a beacon, it lingers. It's the happily ever after we crave, certainly, but more than that, it's a testament to the idea that even from the deepest despair, from the most twisted betrayals, love can forge a new beginning. We are left with a sense of profound satisfaction, a quiet hope that such transformative love, such acceptance, might just be possible in a world that often feels too harsh. And as we turn away, perhaps we carry a little of their light with us, a reminder that even the most savage beast might simply be waiting for the right hand to reach out.